Hello beautiful people, my name is Venti and today I'm going to be telling you my 5-star series predictions. So as we're all book nerds here, I know I'm a little bit preaching to the choir when I say that I know the pain of having a series that you love at first start to go off the rails, or have a series that begins kind of mediocre become a phenomenal thing. And then of course there's the unicorn series, which are basically perfect from the very beginning all the way to the very end. But within all three of those types of examples, there can be books that you really love and would give like 5 stars to, and books that maybe you don't like so much. For the purposes of this video, I'm not talking about, oh, I'd rate every single book 5 stars, and a series where maybe I'd rate one of them 4.5 can't make the cut. I'm not talking about the individual arcs from book to book, I'm talking about the overall series arcs. This video is a little bit predictions and a little bit manifestations because for many, if not most of the series I'm going to name here, I've only read 1 or 2 of the books before. So this is me keeping my fingers crossed that the joy that the story so far has brought me is going to continue through to the finale of the series. But I've got one heck of a stack here of books to show you, so I think it's best if we just get started. First is a book and series that I truly cannot stop thinking about, and it is really the reason I'm making this video in the first place, and that is the Witchland Saga by Susan Dennard. The first book of this series, Truth Witch, follows the eponymous Truth Witch, Sophia von Hastrel, and her best friend, Isolde de Medenzi, who is a thread witch. Sophie's power of truth witchery, so knowing whether people are lying or telling the truth, is considered especially rare and especially useful, particularly as the world they live in, the Witchlands realm, is coming to the end of a 20-year truce and war seems imminent. On top of that, the sources of magic around this world appear to be dying and everything appears to be going wrong because of it. And the Witchland Saga follows Sophie and Isolde's journey as well as a whole huge slew of other characters as they navigate the environmental and political landscape that Susan Dennard has so beautifully woven in this story. There's so many things that I love about the story so far, chief being the friendship between Sophie and Isolde. I love when ladies are friends with each other and it's not like weird and argumentative and one-upsmany. They just truly love each other and want each other to succeed and to be together. I love them so much. Coupled with the fantastic magical system and the oodles of political intrigue. And let's not forget the environmental message that's at the heart of it all. This is for sure going to be one of those series that I adore from start to end. It's almost over, unfortunately. The penultimate book of this series, Witch Shadow, is coming out in just a few days, and I cannot wait to read it. I suppose that putting this series on here is a bit of a cheat because I have read the vast majority of it, and I don't believe that Susan Dennard could actually go off the rails and make me not love this series and give it a 5-star rating at the end of the day, but it would have also felt deeply disingenuous not to include it on here, as this is my current favorite ongoing series of all time, perhaps my favorite series of all time. Following Truth Witch, we have the series that it actually dethroned as my favorite fantasy series of all time, and that is the Graceling Saga by Kristin Cashore. Again, this one feels like a little bit of a cheat because each of the books are sort of standalones, and up until this past year, this was a completed series to the best of my and anyone else's knowledge. But with Kristin Cashore releasing Winterkeep, her continuation of the Graceling series, I felt the need to revisit it, and since there is new material to read within it, it's not officially over anymore, so I can still consider it a 5-star prediction, which again is very likely to come true as long as it holds up, which I'm pretty sure it will. Like I said, the Graceling Realm series is a series of interconnected standalones, so it's deeply difficult to actually describe in any meaningful way. Suffice it to say that it exists in a world where people are born with graces, and a grace is like a preternatural ability to be really good at one thing beyond the scope of normal ability that you can get with training or just regular talent. The way people with graces are identified is that they have heterochromia, and the first book, Graceling, follows our protagonist Katza, who is graced with killing. She is the niece of a king, so you would expect her to have a relatively privileged lifestyle. However, because of her grace, she is basically kept as his thug. And because of this lack of socialization, her people skills are rusty. But in the midst of some severe political turmoil in these realms, Katza and her grace basically become her kingdom's only hope. What I love about this series is the variety thereof. Each companion novel has followed a different type of person in this world, and though the stories all interweave and interconnect, and clearly the ones that happened in the past have an impact on what's happening in the future, each one very much does sort of stand on its own, and each story is interesting on its own. And I'm very excited to revisit these old favorites and continue with the series. Hopefully it also will be a new favorite of mine. Following that up with a far more recent read, I think the Good Luck Girls series by Charlotte Nicole Davis is going to absolutely blow me away. I've only read the first book of the series so far, The Good Luck Girls, and it follows Aster, one of the eponymous Good Luck Girls, who are essentially young women of this nation known as Arquetta, who are the daughters of debtors sold into indentured servitude, specifically into sex work, to help pay off their family's debts. When Aster's younger sister Clementine accidentally kills Bragg, which is essentially a man who has paid for their services, Aster knows that it spells death for her sister, and so she, along with several other girls from their welcome house, hatch a plan of escape. However, it turns out that the man that Clementine killed was politically far more powerful than any of the girls anticipated, and so their escape turns into a running for their lives in the hopes of finding a place where they can eventually finally be free. What I loved about this book is what I think I will continue to love throughout the rest of the series, and that is the deep bonds that these women form with one another. I love an ensemble cast, but I especially love a girl gang, and the Good Luck Girls are 100% that. Whether or not they get along on their road doesn't matter so much as attaining their mutual goal does. And I really, really love the trope of allies by circumstance become closer and more important to one another. Furthermore, I think Charlotte Nicole Davis is an incredibly strong writer. This is their debut novel, and the way that they crafted the atmosphere and the tone of their world was impeccable. I think it's hard sometimes to establish a world when characters are fleeing. The touchstones and things that you notice if you were to live in a place for a longer period of time are harder to notice if you're only in a place for a couple of minutes or an hour or a day. And yet Davis manages to, in a relatively short page count, without sacrificing any of the breakneck pace of the story. And following those up with a couple of series that I haven't even started, but I really am manifesting some love for them. Starting with Legendborn by Tracy Dion. This book follows Bree Matthews, a 16-year-old who, while at a college residence program for gifted high schoolers, sees a monster attack on her first day on campus. And she ends up joining the Arthurian secret society that has been built to fight these monsters. I've heard truly nothing but good things about Legendborn, and stories about secret societies set in small towns are just my absolute bread and butter. And I think I'm really gonna like the story, especially because not only do we have that, but we also have the magical, mystical side of things, where we have a retelling or a reimagining of Arthurian legend, but less cis-het, white, and male than Arthurian legend tends to be. I'm really living for all these King Arthur retellings, and I hope that Legendborn and its sequels continue that trend for me. And the most out there entry on this list, given that the first book hasn't even come out yet, so this is true and pure manifestation. Like, I want this to be amazing. I want to love this book and this series so badly, is Iron Widow by Xiran J. Zhao. So the comp titles for this are Pacific Rim meets The Handmaid's Tale, all set in a sci-fi setting, and I could not be more hyped about this. So if, like me, you've seen Pacific Rim a truly embarrassing amount of times, then you know that one of the great draws of that series are the Jaeger, or the robots piloted by multiple people to fight the kaiju. And in this world, those exist. They're called chrysalises, and 2 people pilot them. Generally speaking, a man and a woman in a fighting pair, and they're used to fight the mecha monsters on the other side of the Great Wall of China. However, this fighting pair isn't always on equal footing. Generally speaking, the woman in this pair, her life force is sucked out of her the longer she is within this chrysalis, and eventually it winds up with her dead. Iron Widow follows the story of Zaytan, a woman who volunteers to become the woman half of one of these pairs, because she is trying to assassinate a super popular, super famous male pilot, because he was directly responsible for the death of Zaytan's sister. Per my understanding of the story, she succeeds in her mission by using the psychic link that the 2 co-pilots have to share in order to kill this man, and in doing so is labeled an Iron Widow, one of the very rare women who actually is the one that survives the piloting process. I think that this story is going to be phenomenal. Anything that's comped to Pacific Rim, I already have like some instant love there for, especially something that draws as heavily as including the like co-piloted psychic connection mech suits fighting monsters. I just think that's the coolest thing in the whole world, so I'm very excited to see it in another piece of media. I'm also really interested to see how Zhao is going to explore the idea of women pilots tending to die within these pairings. And finally, and this is just a personal preference, there is a canon and confirmed polyamorous relationship in this story, and I have seen very, very few of those in the fiction I've read, and I want to read more of it. Following that, we have the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. This trilogy is beloved by BookTube and beyond, and for absolutely good reason. The 5th season is set in a world where seismic natural disasters tend to cause environmental catastrophes known as 5th seasons. These 5th seasons happen every couple hundred years, though are becoming far more frequent. Basically what happens during them is the earth quakes in some major way, it causes an environmental catastrophe, and whatever civilization has been built up until that point is basically considered null and void. Folk have to go back to very small villages with hyper-specialized tasks, etc., that each person has to figure out how to do in order to try to survive the 5th season so that afterward they can restart civilization until the next one pops up. And in such a world, you might think that people like Origins, or people who have a control over the seismic events and who have sort of like earth-bending capabilities, would be praised and revered for being able to keep the earth under control to some degree. You would think that, however, instead the Origins are basically enslaved. Either they volunteer to act as indentured servants for the government, or they are arrested and forced into the servitude anyway. And the 5th season follows 3 such Origins at the dawn of the latest 5th season, at the beginning of the final end of the world. I mean, what can I say about why I think that this series is only going to get better from this first book? I've only read the first, but I am certain that the rest of them are just going to increase in quality and scope. There's a reason that these books won the Hugo Award consecutively in 2016, 2017, and 2018 as they came out. It's because Jemisin knows her craft. The writing of this is spectacular. It's one of the most fluid uses of second person that I've ever seen in a narrative. And the way that the storylines interconnect and interweave is absolutely stunning. And on top of that, I think that the way that Jemisin's plots come together and the way that the twists that she set up culminate is just stunning. I'm very rarely surprised when I get to a plot twist in a book. I can generally figure things out. For this one, I was left very, very surprised for the twist that I will not talk about because it's spoilery, and I really think that at least on your first experience of this series, you should go into it without knowing very much about it because, oh my god, it's just so good. But because for authors that I really love and want to read their entire published works, I like to go into their works in chronological order of publication, I cannot continue with the 5th season until I continue with another 5-star prediction for me, and that is the Inheritance Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. Similarly to the Graceling Saga, this is actually a trilogy of interconnected stories. The first book in this series, 100,000 Kingdoms, follows a young woman named Yeine, whose grandfather is the sort of emperor of the eponymous 100,000 Kingdoms. Yeine is the ruler of one of these 100,000 kingdoms, a sort of small and oft forgotten village. But due to her grandfather's failing health, Yeine is called to the central hub of the palace and is forced into a competition where she is competing to become the heir to the empire. The stakes are pretty high because if she fails, it's not like she can really go back home to her original village. If she fails, she will die. Luckily, or I guess at least luckily for Yeine, the way that her large extended ancestral family gained this enormous political power was by enslaving a family of gods who are bound by blood and magic to obey their every whim. And for whatever reason, these gods have taken a liking to Yeine and are going to help her through this den of snakes and this political intrigue that she has found herself thrust in and deeply unprepared for. I absolutely loved the 100,000 Kingdoms, and though the rest of the books are not going to be direct sequels of Yeine's story, I do think they're going to be fantastic because my favorite parts of the 100,000 Kingdoms appear to be through lines that are going to be present in every one of these stories. Most specifically, political intrigue, and for lack of better phrasing, gods with feelings. I am not a fan of omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing gods. I love it when they are flawed and when they react in very deeply human ways, and they absolutely do here, albeit with far more power, and their tantrums lead to far bigger consequences than human tantrums tend to. But I love stakes that are raised that high, so I think I'm going to love the rest of this series as well. Following that, we have a series where the first book was a childhood favorite, but I think the series as a whole is going to hold up when I reread it, and that is the Girl of Fire and Thorn series by Ray Carson. This story follows a princess named Elisa. She's the second born in her family and is said to be the person to whom a great prophecy refers. But because of that, she's lived a rather sheltered life. And that combined with her comparatively remarkable elder sister has left Elisa feeling like she's not really chosen to do anything. In secret, she is married to a king that she's never met, whose nation is in great turmoil and who, supposedly, she will be able to help. But before she can go to him, Elisa is caught up by some revolutionaries, one of whom believes that she, not necessarily her prophecy or her power, but Elisa herself, is the key to saving him and his people. I'm always a fan of the unlikely chosen one story. There's something about a hero that doesn't think that they are heroic, but then steps up to the plate anyway when the time calls for it, that just really speaks to me. And Elisa, I remember being a lot of that. Additionally, I remember being absolutely enthralled with the world that Ray Carson wrote. The Girl of Fire and Thorns is a desert fantasy, and I'm absolutely in love with the way that Ray Carson described the world that her characters exist in. And if I recall correctly, there is a slow burn romance that doesn't quite culminate, but is promised to grow in scope and in depth of feeling in the rest of the series that I am very excited to get to explore as I finally continue the rest of these books. Following that, we have the Saviors series by Jenna Moreci. This story takes place in the land of Thesson, a nation, in theory, ruled by a woman known as the Savior. The Savior is God's blessed with powers that make the earth fertile and keep people healthy, and her line has been unbroken in Thesson for generations. In the first book, the Savior's champion, a young farmer/artist named Tobias, enters the Sovereign's Tournament, which is the tournament through which several young men of Thesson and other outlying lands compete to become the husband of the Savior. On Tobias's end, the tournament is fraught with peril, but on the Savior's end, it is no more safe. Unfortunately for the sitting Savior, her father has amassed a great deal of political power to himself and believes that the line of the Savior and her rule should end, leaving him to be in charge of Thesson and potentially the rest of the world. And the story follows Tobias and the Savior, whose name I won't reveal for spoiler reasons, as they navigate their respective difficult tasks and slowly fall in love. If you've been on my channel for a while, then you've heard me talk about the Savior series before. I love these books. I really like Jenna Moreci's writing style. It is fast-paced and isn't overly flowery, but that doesn't prevent it from demonstrating an enormous amount of emotion anyway. The romance between Tobias and the Savior is one of the healthiest and most beautiful that I've ever read. As it develops, their relationship feels really honest and real. They have their hiccups and their misunderstandings, especially at first when they're still getting to know one another, but throughout it all, they maintain a great deal of respect and mutual affection. And I just really like seeing how soft they are for one another. And as a dark fantasy romance, the romance is a great deal of the heart of the story, but it is by no means the only thing carrying the story. Moreci has also crafted a very imaginative and very expansive fantasy world. And as we move forward, I know that I can expect a great deal more political intrigue, fantasy violence, and swoon-worthy romance, and I know I'm gonna love it. The next series I want to talk about is the Bone Witch Trilogy by Bryn Chupeko. The first book, The Bone Witch, follows Thea, who discovers that she has the ability to raise the dead, which is very different from the other types of magic that the witches of her family know how to handle. Her necromantic abilities label her a bone witch, something that makes her feared and ostracized in the vast majority of her community. And Thea needs to learn how to embrace and use her very strong gift as dark forces begin to loom around her. I've only read the first book of this series so far, and it was very much a slow burn, lush world. And I really enjoyed reading from Thea's perspective. I thought she was a very interesting protagonist. I love protagonists who make decisions that other people might not agree with. I love ambitious women. I love women who find power and take power regardless of other people's opinions about it. And I'm so excited to continue Thea's journey. I know she's only going to grow in power, and that just delights and warms my cold little heart. And in much the same way, I predict that the Poppy War series by R.F. Kuang is also going to be 5 out of 5 stars for me. The story follows a young woman named Rin who was left orphaned after the previous Poppy War killed her parents. In an effort to escape a hideous arranged marriage, Rin works exceedingly hard to enroll in Sinigard Military Academy, where she trains to become a soldier for the Nikara Empire in anticipation of another Poppy War. But while she's at the academy, Rin realizes that she has a connection to an incredibly powerful god, and that she can call on this god and borrow of their power. Before she is fully trained in how to control this power, however, war breaks out between Nikara and the Federation of Mugden, and Rin and all of her classmates are conscripted early into this war. And the story follows truly the horrors that Rin sees from there. As I've mentioned probably in one of the previous books I've talked about, I adore protagonists who make difficult decisions, ones that other people might not quite agree with. And Rin is that to a T. I hesitate to call her a hero. She's the protagonist in that we follow her, but already in this book, she has begun to make some ugly decisions potentially for the greater good. And I'm excited to see how she is going to evolve or potentially devolve as her story goes on, and the more trauma that she is forced to witness and to cause as the war continues. And then the one series, it occurs to me, that's on this list that isn't sci-fi or fantasy, and that is the Brown Sisters series by Talia Hibbert. This is a collection of romance novels centering the Brown sisters, starting with Get a Life Chloe Brown, continuing with Take a Hint Danny Brown, and concluding with Act Your Age Eve Brown. Chloe Brown was one of my favorite books of last year. It just warmed my heart tremendously. Chloe's life is one of spreadsheets and planning ahead because her chronic illness makes it so that it's very difficult to live life to the fullest, as it were. However, following a near-death incident, she realizes that she has not been living her life to the fullest and she doesn't want to die having not completed at least a couple of things that would make things interesting for her. And so Chloe enlists the help of her grumpy building superintendent Red to help her fulfill some of the items on this bucket list, and the two of them end up falling deeply, deeply in love. The rest of the Brown Sisters trilogy follows the romances of Chloe's younger sisters as they fall in love with their own swoon-worthy beaux, and I truly, truly hope that I love their stories as much as I love Chloe's. As long as they include character work to die for, swoon-worthy and very healthy romance dynamics, by which I mean positive communication and men who have and address their feelings, then I am sure that the rest of these books will give me the same feelings that Chloe Brown did, which is a deep warmth and contentment in my heart. And concluding what I realize now is going to be a very long list and a very long video, so let's wrap this up as quickly as possible. We have the Realm of the Elderlings Saga by Robin Hobb. This one, again, is a little bit cheating because the Realm of the Elderlings Saga, as I call it, is actually a collection of several series within the larger, greater story that is the Realm of the Elderling. I'm holding up book 3 of trilogy number 2 right now, as it is the one I'm currently reading, because I truly cannot hold all 16 books plus the companion novels up without my arms fully shattering, and they definitely wouldn't fit in frame. The very epicenter of all of the stories is a young man named Fitzchivalry Farseer. He is the bastard son of the would-be king of the Six Duchies and is conscripted to become his grandfather, the king's assassin, because that's really the only way that bastards in this world maintain a living status for very long. Fitz is brought into the royal home as an outsider, not quite fitting in with the non-royals because he still has royal blood, but not quite fitting in with the royals either because he is a bastard, and rather isolated from everyone because his job as the assassin's apprentice requires a relative deal of distance and secrecy from those he would otherwise like to befriend and fall in love with. Within his blood, Fitz carries 2 disparate forms of magic: the skill, which is seen as refined and revered and is sort of the staple of the royal bloodline of the Six Duchies, is a sort of like hyper manipulation of people's thoughts. Fitz also has the wit, which is considered like a base-born and low and animalistic type of magic, and it creates a sympathetic bond between the witted person and animals. If the skill is high thought, the wit is more instinct. And according to the Wheels of Destiny and the Wheels of Fate, Fitz is a catalyst, so he is a person destined to bring about change to this world, whether for better or worse, and the story follows him, and he is never okay, and I get really emotional when I talk about the series, and it's very hard to talk about because of the massive scope of the world. I have read the Farseer trilogy, the original 3 books, to completion, and I'm almost finished with the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which is the one that follows that one. So I can pretty confidently say that this is going to be a series that I fall head over heels in love with once I finished all the books. The interconnectedness of these enormous stories, the beautiful scope of the world, dragons, and the themes of fate and love and destiny and personhood and who gets to count as a person, all of those things make this series just an absolute masterpiece, and I cannot wait to finish reading it and probably crawl into a cave and just cry for a million years because holy shit, no one is ever okay. Ever in this series. But I love it because I love to suffer. And there we have it at long last. These are my 5-star series predictions. There is a whole lot of rather hefty fantasy on this list, which I guess is very much on brand for me. But it does mean that when I give you guys the "Was I correct in my assessment" video, it's probably gonna have to be like several follow-ups because there is no conceivable way for me to intelligently speak about all of these series in one video. Regardless, I am very, very excited to continue these series, and I really, really hope that I love them all as much as I think I'm going to. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post videos every weekend, more or less, and I would love to have you join my little bookish family. If you'd like to see more book-related content from me, all of my socials are linked in the description box below. You can find me on Instagram, Goodreads, and Twitter, or you can chat with me in the comments. Let me know which of these series you think I should prioritize and that you think I'm going to like best. Or if writing out a whole comment is very hard, consider just dropping an emoji to let me know that you've made it to the end of this video. Any of the fantasy related ones, so like a genie or a fairy, would be perfect on account of how freaking fantasy heavy this list is for me. But thank you again so much for watching this video, and I will see you at the next one very, very soon. Goodbye.